You're listening to Press Conference USA on the Voice of America. Our guest is Darius Mans. He's president of AfriCare. And I'm Carol Castiel, along with Henok Fente. He's a native of Ethiopia and a broadcaster in VOA's Horn of Africa service. Well, Darius Mans, I'd like to ask you about Chinese investment in the continent. We know that the Chinese have been investing in Africa now for many years, overtaking probably the United States and Europe in terms of foreign investment, exploiting natural resources, oil, gas, and so on for their needs. Does China's growing influence in the continent concern you? Do you see it as a net positive or perhaps a negative?
China and Africa is such an emotional issue for people. I see people on both ends of the spectrum that China is the best thing that's happened to Africa in the last couple of decades, to those who believe it's the new imperialist. I think China has played a very important role in increasing investment in infrastructure. Donors walked away from infrastructure for a long time, and infrastructure is one of the biggest bottlenecks to growth in Africa. So they're meeting a very important need: railways, bridges, airports, power systems, water and sanitation systems. And so I think that's a very important contribution that they make. On the other side of it, of course, are the criticisms that people have, quite legitimately, about local content, about using local labor, local materials, of China being very competitive in the supply of commodities that are undercutting local merchants. I've seen in Tanzania Chinese entrepreneurs frying donuts next to the market ladies.
Exactly.
So it's an enormous competitive threat, not just in Africa, but in other parts of the world. I think the challenge for African countries, again, comes back to what we were just talking about, is negotiating from a position of strength, demanding much better deals, much greater transparency around who's going to do the work. Can we be sure it's done on procurement is on a competitive basis? Can we ensure that there's going to be local content, making sure that these are projects that are in our long-term interest for development? So again, this is a very important responsibility that Africa has.
No question, but that, of course, points to a political issue. I mean, is there the political will? Are the leaders who are negotiating these deals, are they more concerned about perhaps their, wallets than the welfare of the people? The question is, over the last, 20 years since we've had multi-party elections in the continent, do you see a shift in a positive direction? Is there greater sense of responsibility, or are there a lot of autocrats still hanging around who are, again, more interested in their own, how they're going to benefit personally from deals rather than their country?
Well, I see increasingly countries taking a very hard look at some of these deals and negotiating very hard to get better deals, but also doing a much better job of supervising these projects while they are under implementation, including canceling contracts where they see the quality is not there. But I think also important is ensuring that there's real competition. There are other countries that are playing an important role, I think, in investing in infrastructure, as an example. Look at Brazil as an example. In fact, at our gala on November 9, we will be putting the spotlight on Brazil's relationship in Africa, which I think in some ways can be the counterpoint to what China is doing, a different way of approaching it, where Brazilian firms work to build local capacity, where they work to ensure they're following local requirements and standards with regard to safety, the environment, of ensuring that these projects they're investing in have a long-term developmental role. We are working on projects of that kind to be sure that these investments that are being made in natural resources, the natural resource boom in Africa, becomes a development boom that benefits people.
It certainly can, but it can, as I said, it can also benefit just a few people. And for example, the DRC, Democratic Republic The Democratic Republic of Congo is coming up, elections are coming up. It's a huge country with enormous natural and resources. How do you see developments there? Because it's really, whether regarding the treatment of women, the, again, exploitation of resources that aren't really benefiting the population. Do you see a
that also looks into the bigger picture of Africa, looking into China as a political model, because in the late 1990s we had about almost more than half of sub-Saharan Africa was electoral. There was elected democracies in Africa, but we've seen a downslide in with increased Chinese involvement. We can talk about a number of countries that have actually made some democratic progress, sliding back. So, how do you look at it in terms of Africa regressing back to dictatorship, looking at the China model versus the Western model of democracy?
Well, I think one of the positive things that's happening on that front is this interconnected world that we live in, access to information, especially for young people, and so sort of demanding much greater transparency, accountability from leadership. And you see some positive signs of it really having a real impact on the continent. Many people inspired by the Arab Spring, which I would argue, Africa's wave of multi-party elections in the 90s preceded the Arab Spring. But I look at countries like Angola as an example. And in response, I see now much greater efforts being made to try and to be sure that there is a real sharp focus on development projects that will have an impact on people. It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. We not get to where we are overnight. But I think if there are some really positive examples of this, very important for all of us to be putting the spotlight on it and talking about it to show what can be done.
Darius Mans, given the budgetary constraints on the United States, are you concerned that aid to Africa, whether in the form of actual assistance or even investments, could decline? I mean, you were the head of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. There's talk that maybe funding for that organization may diminish. They fund infrastructure projects very critical to the long-term development of the continent. How worried are you about this trend?
Well, I'm very worried because I think people mistakenly believe that cutting foreign aid is part of the solution to the fiscal challenges of the United States government. The polls show that the one thing most Americans can agree on is cut foreign aid, because they mistakenly believe that it's 25, 35% of the budget when it's less than 1%. I think we should also take some responsibility for this, organizations like mine, of helping to educate the American public that aid can be very effective, that it's only less than 1% of the budget, that we are far below what many other countries are providing in aid. But the difference that aid can make, smart aid, which is the focus of this administration and the changes that they have made, can really make a difference that will improve the lives of people in Africa, will improve the environments within which U.S. businesses investing in Africa operate in, that will improve security, stability, because a stable, prosperous Africa is in everybody's interest.